Okay, I am so excited to have Mark with us today on the show. Thank you so much for being on the show.
No, my pleasure.
Um, you are a very accomplished photojournalist who's been over like 100 countries and all 7 continents.
That's true.
And your work has appeared in publications including Vanity Fair, Life, Nat Geo, Time, Newsweek, Vogue, Forbes, the New York Times, the LA Times, just to name a few. I have so many questions for you today because you're basically living the life, the dream life that I wish I had, which is to travel around the world and document different events and special places and stuff like that, meeting new people and learning new cultures.
Yeah.
So I am just very appreciative that you're on the show with us today.
Thank you, Shelley. It's great to be here.
Thank you.
Actually, we're here in my place.
Right.
So,
Exactly. With so many books behind
Yeah.
us.
and this is just a small part of the book collection. I love books and
Wow.
inspired by them, that's for sure.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to share the story of how we met because I thought it was kind of funny.
Yeah.
So we met at the Leica store, Los Angeles, and I saw Nick Ut in the store. I went up to say hi to him, wanted to take a photo with him. So then Nick turned around and said, "Oh, we could ask my friend Mark over there to take our photo." And I didn't know you were the Mark Harris. I just like,
Yeah.
"Oh, okay, friend over there.
Yeah.
Here's my phone." And then you said, I'm also actually a photographer. My book is over there on the shelf. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, you're Mark Harris, like North Korea. Like I see that book all the
That's
time."
true. Well, I use Mark Edward Harris because
Right.
Mark Harris is such a boring name that it was actually 1998. I added my middle name. I never in school or anything used my middle name because
Right.
usually middle names, the only time you hear it in school is when they're talking about assassins, right? Lee Harvey Oswald, John
funny.
Wilkes Booth, and all that. But Mark Harris is just dull. And so I actually made a conscious decision when I made my first book
Gotcha.
called Faces of the 20th Century Master Photographers and Their Work to add the Edward.
I see.
And it has a nice cadence to it, Mark Edward Harris. So, ooh, that's
Right.
Mark Edward Harris.
Right.
Yeah,
I
so that's
see.
where that came in.
Gotcha. So you've been friends with Nick for
Yeah.
a while?
Oh, I've known Nick. Well, and it actually sort of goes back to around the time of that first book, Faces of the 20th Century, which was famous photographers who put a visual face on the 20th century. But unfortunately, I didn't really meet Nick until 1998. I didn't realize he lived in Los Angeles.
Gotcha.
And so I interviewed him just after when the book came out in '98. But I've done features on him for LA Times magazine, Vanity Fair, because that's part of what I do. Is I love interviewing, just like with you, interviewing other photographers. And Nick is such an amazing person. We've traveled all over the world together. We were in Antarctica together. We've been back to Vietnam many times, including back to Trang Bang, where he shot, his famous,
Right.
photo of Kim Phuc, and I know Kim as well.
Right.
The little girl in the picture. So
That's
yeah,
that's
he's
crazy.
an amazing guy. Yeah. So
How was traveling to Vietnam with him like?
well, it's unbelievable. I
Well,
mean,
how was traveling to Vietnam like, and then how was traveling with him?
well, I had been to Vietnam. My first photo essay, when I really realized the importance of putting together a series of photographs to tell a story, was in Vietnam in 1991, 92, around that time. And then I didn't go with Nick, I think, until 2000. But to be in Vietnam with Nick is literally, traveling with history. I mean, here's a guy who really was one of the key. I mean, we talk about most important photos in history, and his is one of three for sure. His picture of Kim Phuc, running down the road after being hit by napalm. And so to actually travel with him to Japan, well, we've actually traveled to Japan together, sorry. But to travel to Vietnam with him and then to go to Trang Bang where he took the photo
Right.
was really incredible. And so we've been back numerous times. In fact, we taught a workshop together in Vietnam. So yeah, it's incredible, and everybody knows him and loves him there.
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah,
So I didn't realize that Kim Phuc,
yeah.
she actually moved to the U.S.
No, Canada.
Canada.
She lives in Toronto.
Gotcha.
Well,
Gotcha.
she actually fled. She was in Cuba and studying medicine, and she met another Vietnamese person there. They got married, and then they went on their honeymoon to Moscow. And on the way back, they fled. There was a fueling stopover in Canada, and then she wanted asylum, so they were granted asylum, and she's lived in Toronto, and now she's been back and welcomed to Vietnam.
I see.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Because I found photos that you've taken of her and
photographed
Nick together.
her in this,
and her cousins that were in the same photo.
Oh yeah.
That I think it's amazing just to know that most of them survived. Right.
Well, she lost her immediate family. There's a picture of a baby who's a cousin who died, but yeah, her brother survived, and two of her cousins, and I photographed them. Her brother has since passed away, but I met him maybe in year 2000 when he was still alive. But she's really an amazing person. And and that's part of the thing about history. I've met so many people that are part of history. And I was with Nick at the White House when he received a medal from the president. And so there's history right there. And I've documented that. And that actually was a story for Newsweek as well. And so we sort of, great friends. And at the same time, we do, projects together, working relationship as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I know you said you interviewed and photographed a lot of these other famous photographers. What were some of the most memorable moments for you?
Well, there's been so many. I think meeting Alfred Eisenstadt, who did the kissing couple in Times Square. I mean, I think the strongest photo he ever did is actually a mother and child in the rubble of Hiroshima, but he's not known for that. He's most known. Oh, he was a great Life magazine photographer. These photos, so many of his photos, ran. I mean, it was mainly for Life magazine once he moved to the U.S. But I would say Izzy is on the top of the list. Gordon Parks, Helmut Newton, Annie Leibovitz. One after another, and I continue to do it to this day.
Yeah.
It's just so many amazing photographers out there. Gerd Ludwig lives in LA as well, so I see him all the time. I'm so fortunate because, as you know, with photography, it's sort of a solo journey through life, but yet when you have the camaraderie of other photographers, it's incredible, and I'm so fortunate. I don't use the word lucky because luck is pure chance, and it's an effort and working extremely hard that makes these things happen.
I totally agree with that.
As you know,
sure.
all too well. So
for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to segue into your background. I want to know more about you. Have you always been a photographer? Did you grow up doing photography?
Well, my dad did photography as part of his work, doing PR for like KCBS Radio. KLAC down here in LA. And so we always had cameras around, and we always did, summer trips, and I just loved doing these trips, and he would bring his movie camera and 35 millimeter camera, and I sort of was his assistant. More than my brother, I don't think he was particularly into the photography part. And so I loved documenting it. I also, would collect postcards of places, and have a diary, which I have no clue where that diary is. But so early on, I was doing sort of what I'm still doing, but didn't know it. And it was not till college when I took some photo classes and went into a wet darkroom, as opposed to the digital darkrooms these days, and put the paper and had the enlarger project, the negative onto the paper, and then put it into the developer, and then see the image come up, that I completely fell in love with the magic of photography. And that magic has never that feeling of magic has never left me at all.
Yeah.
And but my bachelor's was in history. My master's was in a special major I created that combined photography and history to do documentary work.
Oh, wow.
And so I sort of had a clue by the time I went for my master's what I wanted to do. Making that a reality was much more difficult. You know, as you know, because making a living at this is not easy. But it's worked out, you know, for all these years. So I'm almost at my 40th anniversary of this, maybe.
Wow.
I think.
Okay.
I think because the Merv Griffin show was my first regular gig, and that was from '83 to '86, and so maybe I'm past my 40th anniversary. Wow.
Wow. Okay.
That's scary.
So then, since you touched upon it, I wanted to ask you about having photography as a profession.
Yeah.
How hard has it been for you to pursue photography full time in trying to make ends meet? Because I actually went to school for photography.
Oh, that's interesting.
I went to USC for photography and filmmaking as a minor, but I couldn't picture myself doing the freelance lifestyle, you know? So I went into the corporate world right away, and I would shoot, you know, photos, events, or, you know, work on different film sets on the weekends.
Yeah.
But I always had my 9 to 5 as a backup.
Yeah.
And
smart.
Because I've
Very
always
smart.
told myself that there's no way I can make this work.
Yeah. And you own your own house?
Yes.
See, there you go. See, there's a difference right there. It's really tough.
Okay.
It's really tough, but I've really done well. I live a simple life in certain ways. Economically, I live simply, but, you know, because I just love being surrounded by books and travel, and so many of the assignments I get, you know, somebody's paying for me to travel somewhere.
Right.
So it's not like, you know, people who, you know, do these big, you know, very expensive, you know, cruises or whatever. In other words, I'm being asked to speak on them, or I'm doing this, or I'm doing that. And so I've sort of found my way to do things. And I assisted for years when I first got out of school, which taught me, you know, the professional way of doing things, because I didn't go to school for photography per se. As I said in my master's, I did take some photo classes, but I really learned photography through the professional photo realm through assisting.
Hands-on experience.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
With you know, tight deadlines, lots of equipment.
Which I think is actually more practical
Well, the
than
combination
learning
is great.
it
No, you
in
do both.
school.
Yeah.
Because I learned a lot about theory and, you know,
Yeah.
different artists and whatnot. But
Yeah.
in terms of actually how to make a living doing it,
Yeah.
that's a different
Well,
story.
assisting definitely showed me how other photographers were doing it, and so I really learned a lot and are appreciative for that experience for sure. And then I would do more and more assignments on my own, even, you know, just shooting real estate or anything just to shoot. As you said,
Okay.
events like what you did.
Right.
You have to do that in the beginning, and then slowly I started to see a way to go. I was shooting a lot more advertising at one time, which is lucrative, but I never
Right.
really loved it. I did win, you know, Clio Award, Aurora Gold, lots of awards for that.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed it, but not at the level of once I really discovered how to do documentary work, like, you know, eventually my books on North Korea, or more a fine art approach, my book called The Way of the Japanese Bath about hot springs. I still love, you know, advertising work on occasion, but I definitely don't pursue it. But that definitely helps pay the bills for sure. And I've always been in the
Gotcha.
black. I know how to manage my money, and so in certain ways I live below my means in a sense, where sometimes I might, like I did a huge campaign for Coca-Cola around the world, but I didn't just spend it all.
Yeah.
In other words, it's like, okay, this won't be the average amount of money that I bring in, and so I just balance it. But, you know, I eat well, I travel.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not easy. So there's a long answer to a short question. So.
No, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing that you needed to find a lot of different types of assignments, right?
Yeah.
To kind of keep the money coming.
Yeah, well, you know, I found the different assignments not to keep the money coming so much, but just to, be out there and build a portfolio.
Right,
Well, of course, to
course,
keep the money going.
that,
That's a
right,
fait accompli. You
right.
have to keep the
Yeah,
income in,
of
or
course.
you don't survive at all.
Of course.
But yeah, so I would do things I didn't particularly want to do early on. Events are something I just, maybe there's people out there who really enjoy that.
Right.
I'm not one of them.
Right.
Wouldn't say I hate it, but just, the grip and grin sort of photos are just not something
I understand.
like doing. But
Right.
nothing wrong with that, that's for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Have you ever like pitched your like some creative ideas to, let's say, a company or like a sponsor for them to like sponsor you a trip out somewhere?
Oh, all the time. That's more for like tourism bureaus.
Gotcha.
Not the advertising. I don't go to corporations so much and say, hey, let's do this or that. That wouldn't necessarily be a bad idea at all. But I do it much more for government tourist bureaus.
Okay.
To get assistance. So like when I did the Japanese bath book, and I also speak a lot for the Adventure Travel Trade World Summit. In other words, but they also asked me to come in and say, hey, would you, work with us to like show how photography is such an important part of the travel industry. So I get asked to speak and do these talks. I've spoken for Nikon. They flew me to New York to talk about roughly what we're talking about now, how to survive and prosper as a photographer. Also, my dad early on gave me a book. It just happened to come into the office when he was doing PR, in film and television, and the book was called How to Survive and Prosper as an Artist, and it knocked down the myth that you have to struggle. You have to, in other words, that you have to play the starving artist. It doesn't have to be that way at all. I mean, you have to work extremely hard, which I've always done. I mean, I sold my baseball cards to buy equipment, and I did all sorts of stuff.
Right.
I dug ditches. I helped out a friend who's a plumber to dig ditches. I literally did. I've done all sorts of stuff, early on. I mean, I was working since the day I was 16 at Taco Bell, Baskin Robbins, Carmen's Ice Cream, Nibbler's Restaurant. So like what we all do. But fortunately, once I got out of school, the very first job was actually in the travel industry because I knew I loved travel. And I was working as a tour operator. But that was short-lived. It wasn't really where I wanted to go.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and so now, assisting was a way to make a steady income.
Right.
And learn, the trade.
Right.
Yeah, so
definitely.
That was it.
Yeah. Okay. So we're talking about traveling. Where was your first foreign country?
Well, first foreign country, I went with my folks. We mostly did domestic trips, but we went to France and England. Loved the trip. Learned what not to do for jet lag, which was as soon as you get overseas, you don't go to sleep.
Right.
Because then you wake up at midnight.
Right.
And it's like, what am we doing? And so I learned early on. That trip I didn't. I learned what not to do.
Right.
After that, and now, as you said, it's been, I think, up to maybe 107, 108 countries. Wherever I am, that's the only time that exists. And just, I land somewhere, and if it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's not. I never say, oh, my biological clock is this or that. But I would say the first real photo trips were pretty early on, 91, 92, going to Vietnam. It was huge because I grew up in the era of having the Vietnam War on TV and listening to Walter Cronkite and seeing this incredible country, but also seeing this horrible thing going on and not understanding it because, it was in junior high school. And to go there and to see it in color and real and to drive in from the airport in Hanoi and then to walk out on the streets was just the most amazing thing. And to be able to do that with a camera in hand.
Right.
I think that, and actually those images were published in Taiwan, ironically enough, in I think it was called either Photography International or Camera International.
Okay.
In a Taiwanese publication.
Oh.
And they did a big spread on my Vietnam work. And I think that had a major impact on me because I understood, okay, body of work, not just single images,
right.
single images. And of course, there are photographers that are most known for single images. Joe Rosenthal with a flag raising at Iwo Jima, which is part of my book, which was not a set-up shot. It's come down through history, unfortunately. It's a second flag raising, but not set up.
Right.
You know, Nick's shot, you could say those are one-off shots. They're great photographers, but they're known for single images.
Right.
But if you look at people like Sebastian Salgado, you know, he's most known for his bodies of work, his amazing books. And so most photographers in my field are known for bodies of work. Like you could say Gerd Ludwig, well, then you know his Chernobyl work or Moscow at Night. I mean, you could name most photographers.
Mary Ellen Mark.
Mary Ellen Mark, she does bodies of work. I mean, they're always super powerful, but Indian Circus, or you know, the Falkland Road, which is about the prostitutes in Mumbai. Bodies of work, and that's the key. So I always recommend when I teach workshops, is develop bodies of work. Think about stories, and it came very easy to me. I know some people struggle a little bit, but if they stop and they say, okay, wait a second, what do I really enjoy? What do I find interesting? And so for me, history is such an important part. I love the study of history, whether it's photography or general history. And so I've pitched stories, and I pitch stories all the time to magazines, that's for sure. I learned from Eve Arnold, actually. She said, never wait for the phone to ring. That's why she did her book in China. It was a long-term project. And so I do the same thing. I look for projects I think will be interesting, whether it's you know, we're coming up, let's say a long time ago, we were coming up on the 60th anniversary of D-Day. Well, I pitched it to a magazine knowing that I had to get there by November, December, because we needed at least a 3-month lead for the story to come out. And then they needed time so people could book trips there if they wanted to do it. So you have to think in advance all the time.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. So we're talking about different bodies of work, and you also have a wide range of different bodies of work.
Yeah.
I want to talk about North Korea.
Okay.
And because, first of all, I always see that book in the Leica store in LA. And I'm like, wow, like, how does one travel through North Korea and being able to document the country and not get into trouble? I mean, I've never been, I know very little about the country, so I'm assuming it's pretty restricted.
It's tough. It is restricted, the access to places, but I've been there 10 times and been all over the country. I've been to most of the provinces there.
Okay. Do you have a guide when you travel there to tell you where you can go?
You can't travel on your own. But I was invited, well, I went twice. There used to be a place called Kumgangsan, Diamond Mountains, up in the south east corner of the country, northeast of South Korea. And you could go in and cross the border, and it was just this very restricted area. So that was actually my second trip there, first time.
So you go in through South Korea?
No, never. That was a one-off.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
okay.
that's when you could go to Kumgangsan. Usually I go through Beijing and go in. But what happened, the big break was actually my third trip, when I was invited to go with the New York Philharmonic when they were doing a concert there in 2008.
Wow.
And I was able to document, they were invited by the North Koreans to put on, as sort of just like with China, with Nixon, you know, and they had ping pong diplomacy. They were trying music diplomacy, and it was actually the North inviting the New York Philharmonic, and it was great.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, and it was a very positive
they
time.
Do that.
Yeah, it really looked like there was real potential. Unfortunately, that's really fallen apart. But I had an exhibition at the Korea Society in New York of that work, and the North Korean ambassador to the UN came to the show and liked the show. And he said, or exhibition, and he said, I'll sign off on a visa for you anytime. And so that's what really opened up the opportunity. And so then I've been back so many times and had 2 books out on it. And the second book won it won the International Photography Awards Book of the Year.
Wow.
which then led to me getting the Turkey advertising campaign. And so that's what happens a lot too, which you talk about getting jobs and seeking jobs.
Right.
Like my Wanderlust book won an IPA award as well, and then an art director and producer at Coke saw this book and said, and then she looked at my work because they were looking for somebody to shoot real people around the world, and but also be able to do studio lighting in difficult situations. And so I got that gig, and that's that gig I mentioned earlier that got me, a lot of money, which helped pay for other things.
Gotcha.
But for North Korea, it's not easy. They will look at your photos and say, okay, you got to erase that, you got to erase this.
Okay.
But you work really hard and you create relationships, and genuine relationships. I mean, the people are not just robotic, even though we tend to do this simplistic thing and think, oh, it must be this, it must be that.
Right.
But most people there, they're just trying to live their daily lives.
Yeah.
Send their kids off to school, have food for them. And yes, the 1990s were horrible with famine.
Yeah.
Into the 2000s, I've seen amazing progress in terms of modern infrastructure. Not saying everything's great there at all, and sometimes people are upset that I don't want to say, oh, North Korea is bad, it's this, that. It's much more complex than that.
Right, I understand.
And when you travel, just like with my work in Iran,
Yeah.
I might not like the regime or this or that, but most people are just trying to live their daily lives there. We have between, Taiwan and mainland China, issues, and who knows how that's going to unfold. But, both sides of the, the sea that separates them, you have people just living their lives, right? And a lot of relatives, actually, of course, on both sides. So, and then, we're enemies and then there's wars, and then, a couple of years later, we're friends. I mean, look how well Japan and the U.S. get along. The amazing thing is that North Korea, in 1953, the armistice was signed, and we're still in a technical state of war. And where most wars have come and gone, and the belligerents are now friends, we still have, the situation in North Korea, which is really amazing. It's been going on this long.
Yeah, it really is a shame. So for the images that you chose for your books on North Korea, did you need to get like approval?
Oh, no, not at all.
No. Okay.
In fact, I wasn't even saying I was photographing for a book. If I had said I was doing that, I wouldn't have been allowed in at all.
Gosh.
I would say, though my book came out in 2013, my second book, and they must have been aware of that. And I went back after for Vanity Fair, worked with the amazing writer Pico Iyer. And we did something on the film festival there and the film industry there. And so you never know what they're aware of, not aware of.
Right. You just kind of go with the flow.
I just sort of go with it. And the thing is, you're very careful not to do things there that will get you in trouble.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to realize where you are. But that goes for all over the world.
Exactly.
But of course, North Korea, I once on a Koryo Air, I folded the newspaper that they gave out, and there was a picture of Kim Jong-un in it, and they got really mad, a flight attendant, because you cannot fold a newspaper with a picture of Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-un, wherever. And so.
So you had to like open it and like flatten it out.
And so those are sort of things, but you're not going to get thrown in jail for that. If you do something really disrespectful, or you steal something or whatever, or you try to place a Bible under something, and that actually happened when I was with some people there. Some guy stuck a Bible under a trash bin in, what was it, Rajan or Sanbong, or somewhere, I forget the place, and he ended up in jail for a while. And so things do happen, but don't do that.
Yeah, right.
You're also not getting yourself in trouble, not only getting yourself in trouble, you're getting anybody connected with it, and so they could lose their jobs, the North Koreans, or end up a lot worse than that.
Yeah.
And so it's really, be respectful when you go somewhere.
Yeah, for sure.
That's the key.
For sure.
Yeah.
How about Iran? You've also made a book on Iran, but unfortunately, I couldn't really find a lot of public images on it. So I was wondering if like those images were restricted.
Oh, not at all. No, that's through Chronicle Books. So my first two books, first North Korea book was through Chronicle Books. My first Iran book, or only Iran book, was through Chronicle Books. And those photos were not restricted at all. I mean, I'm not going to have North Korea or Iran say you can use this, you can't use that.
Yeah.
I mean, there'd be no point in doing it in the first place.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there are a lot of images out there in the book. There's prints that are, for sale, through galleries. But yeah, North Korea definitely people seem to be most intrigued with, and so those prints have done really well.
Okay.
Especially the more sort of, I guess if you could say, fine artish one, the one of the North Korean traffic officer and one of the Arirang mass games. But Iran was fascinating as well. That time I did get stopped and interrogated in a place called Horam Shah on a Shuttle Arab waterway as I was trying to get out of the country to go to Kuwait rather than going back to Tehran and flying out. And so that was my original itinerary. And I think that put up some red flags.
Oh, wow.
And they brought me in and they couldn't fathom what I was doing there. And I couldn't fathom what I was doing there at that point. But at 1 minute to 11, they let me go, and I was able to get out onto the hydrofoil. And I said to my friend I was traveling with from who's Danish, I said, please never let me come back here. Oh. Because I really felt that I was not going to get out that day.
Yeah.
And I have my good friend Roxana Sabiri, was in prison for a while.
Oh my God.
There, wrote a great book about her experience there. But I think she would have preferred never to have had the experience and have to write the book.
For sure.
But that's, it's for real. Things can happen.
Yeah.
But 1 minute to 11, he handed me my passport back, and I was able to get on the hydrofoil and got out. And that was my second trip there. But it was fascinating. Once again, it's just daily life. It's people trying to do the best they can, and very interesting place to visit for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever gone into any kind of situations where you are like, oh no, I'm in trouble now, like in a foreign country?
Well, the Iran situation was definitely, this could be a problem. No fault of my own, because I didn't do anything other than being there, which one could say, well, that's your fault of your own.
Right.
But I didn't do anything illegal. It's just that, what am I doing here?
Right. They were just.
I mean, I was careful not to try to get any liquor there. You know? In other words, don't do what you're not supposed to do. I mean, North Korea, I once forgot a Russian exit visa because I was planning on getting out through there's a tiny bit of North Korea over the Tumen River where you can cross and go into Russia, and that was my plan, but I forgot my Russian visa, and so I couldn't get out, and so then I was brought in front of a tribunal.
Oh my God.
And asked, and at least one of them, maybe two of them, thought I did it on purpose for whatever reason, and so I got stuck there a few extra days.
Okay.
But then I sort of go into this sort of fatalistic mood. It's like, okay, what's going to happen is going to happen. Doesn't mean I'm not concerned about what might happen, but I also didn't do anything purposely to create the situation. And most people try. In fact, they tried to help me get a visa. They said, okay, it's going to cost $500. We'll have somebody drive down to Wonchon, and that didn't pan out. So then eventually, they drove me to the Chinese border, and just kicked me out across the border.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was fascinating. I didn't take a single photo on that drive.
Yeah, right.
I was on my best behavior.
Of course, of course.
And and so there's been a few incidents. I was in Iraq doing a story. Tim Nelville, a great writer, we were doing something on Kurdish Iraq, and I shot some photos in a bazaar. Somebody didn't like it, and some people started coming at me, and we had a security there, and a great security guy intervened and stopped what could have been not a good situation.
Okay.
But we have so so much potential violence and trouble here in the U.S., it's not like we have to go somewhere far to have that.
Right.
Unfortunately, with so many guns, I'm working on a story on Virginia Tech, which is where the largest school shooting in history took place, where 32 students and faculty were killed.
Yeah.
And plus the guy who did it, killed himself as well. I just wish he did it in a reverse order, and then we wouldn't have that discussion, right? But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. And so we've got serious issues here. Not saying I'd want to live somewhere else, because we have, of course, the greatest freedoms here, but we have real issues and potential danger here too. If you're walking around with cameras at night,
right,
you could be. In fact, Nick Ut, was jumped, here when shooting.
Oh.
Actually, we were together in Washington, D.C.,
okay,
across the street from the White House, and we got attacked.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, the day after he got his
Was
medal.
it a targeted attack?
Not at all.
Okay.
A guy came around the corner.
He just wanted
Tried to,
valuable,
but fortunately I hit him in the solar plexus and he went down.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, and the Secret Service came super fast.
Yeah.
So,
that's
so it was a potential, I've studied martial arts. Doesn't mean I have a chance against
wow.
any weapons, but this guy I don't think expected that. But that's a whole other story. Anyway,
That's great. Okay, so I wanted to talk about your relationship with animals, because you have
well, I've never dated any.
That's good to know.
Okay, just so, not that there's anything wrong with it, but yeah.
Because you've
Well, I guess there is
photographed
something wrong with it, I suppose.
animals.
Yeah.
So I know that you have a book out called The People of the Forest.
Yeah.
And then you also have The Rescues of the Last Resort, but that's not a book.
No. I've done, what happened is, over the years I've photographed animals, but I'm definitely not a wildlife photographer. The weird thing is, and I'm a little bit unusual in the photo industry, because there's a lot of different genres that I step into. And part of it might be because a travel documentary photographer has to move into different areas. And so, whereas if you're a food photographer, you might make a living at that.
Right.
Or if you're an automotive photographer. But for travel documentary, you really have to wear a lot of photographic hats.
Yeah.
And so I have photographed animals along the way, like, grizzlies, in Brooks Falls, catching, salmon. But the people of the forest, and first of all, the name of the book, The People of the Forest, is because the word orangutan translates as the people of the forest. Because people recognize, and there's only orangutans in Sumatra and Borneo, and that's it.
Okay.
And they're separated for thousands of years, with the rise and fall of the ocean, and so now they're not connected anymore. So they've really developed. There's basically 3 different types of orangutans, but you can only find them in Indonesia and Malaysia.
Okay.
I don't know if on Borneo there's actually 3 countries there, and I don't know if occasionally if they walk into Brunei or not. But they are incredible, and I actually was at the Indianapolis Zoo doing a travel. I was in Indianapolis doing a travel story, and it happened to coincide with the opening of the Orangutan Center there.
Oh.
And so I did some portraits using some lights, which was very unusual.
Yeah.
And you could see, and people really reacted to them. The
they
similarities
look so
between
human-like.
Yeah. And when I grow a beard, I look so orangutan. But so it's there's 5 great apes, right? And we're one of the 5.
Yeah.
And along with gorillas, chimpanzees, bonobos, orangutans, humans. That's 5. I think I said all 5. But so I just fell in love with this whole study of orangutans in portraiture, and then I sought out places around the world where I could photograph them at rescue centers, other places, and then of course, going to Borneo and photographing them in the wild was vital to the book.
Right.
And they're incredible. They're very sensitive and very aware
Okay.
not only of themselves, which is always a big thing about consciousness, you know, the whole study of consciousness and awareness, but they really seem to be interested in what you're doing, the curiosity factor. I've had orangutans signal to me to turn my camera around so they can see themselves on the back of the camera.
Wow.
And it's true, 100% true.
Oh my gosh.
Now that wouldn't be in the wild.
Right,
But
like the studio.
their awareness.
Okay.
Yeah, or my studio setups. Of course, they're not brought into a studio, but I've set up sort of a studio
Around
environment.
them, right, right.
Yeah.
So do they like pose for you? Because
no,
they look like they're posing
they
for
do,
you in the
but
shots.
you know that's the thing with the strobe. You can catch, you know, and occasionally I use Stella lights. So I've used Pro Photos typically because that split second when they look, I can freeze that. But so it really looks like they're just sitting there posing, but it's just a fraction of a second. Now, certain places I can't use strobe. And so I've used my Stella lights, constant lights, but I do like to get my ISO really down, and the background black by overpowering the ambient light.
Right.
And so it's a you know, it's a combination of things. I don't consider myself a particularly technical person, but I know technique inside and out, because I've always learned things on a need-to-know basis.
Right.
And so, you know, I learned how to, you know, photograph them to get the results I wanted. So it's always reverse engineering. It's like, okay, I know this is what I want. How do I get that?
Right.
And so I keep it simple. You know, the cameras these days, I mean, the Nikon Z9, Z8 manuals, I think about 914 pages, and all the other manufacturers are about the same. But like before the Olympics, I read every page. Didn't understand every page, but I did read every page.
Wow.
And it was actually Nick Ut, our friend, because I said, you know, I have to learn how to use this Z9.
Okay.
How am I going to...
Were you given it?
Or? No.
Okay.
I bought it. But I wanted to... I get a lot of support from Nikon, but not given cameras. But I had it just before the Olympics in Beijing. And Nick said, you know, go out and shoot hummingbirds, which was brilliant.
Right.
Because then I was able to practice with 3D tracking, very quick changing things. And so they really were my mini athletes before I went over.
Gotcha.
Because so in any profession, to get to a decent level, you have to practice.
Of course.
And put your time in. And so that by reading, you know, all 914 pages, so I remember the number, by, you know, practicing, that I felt confident, you know, being, you know, I first photographed in Tokyo, but that was with, you know, the D6 or whatever. But then when I went mirrorless, that was, you know, I had to get up to speed with that for sure.
So how was shooting the Olympics like?
Amazing.
I've seen some pretty amazing shots from you.
Thank you. Well, the last one in Paris, you know, of course, to have, you know, front row center, which it's not even front row, I'm beyond that. We're, you know, the photo, we're in our little photo areas. But to be able to photograph, you know, the greatest athletes in the world, in both the Olympics and Paralympics, is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Like Simone Biles, to be right there, and she's a few feet away.
Exactly.
It's just unbelievable. And so you have to know your material. I mean, you have to know your equipment. You have to know what they're doing. You know, since I love sports, I'm pretty aware of athletes' moves.
Right.
And so, you know, so
you're
so
anticipating.
The timing, oh, you have to.
Right.
But the focusing, you know, of them flipping around and doing all this stuff, you know, super fast shutter speeds, but you don't want too much depth of field because you don't want your ISOs to go, you know, insanely high up.
Right.
And so I pick my tools depending on what I'm going to do. You know, I love working with the Leicas, you know, for my Japanese bath series now. So when I started going digital, the monochrome, the Leica monochrome.
Oh yeah, I love the monochrome cameras.
Yeah, with a fixed 28.
Yeah.
Is perfect for my Japanese bath series.
The
and then the underwater, you know, which is old. They don't make it anymore, unfortunately.
The XU, right? Yeah.
Is fantastic for
those
my
are
above
fun
below
cameras for sure.
They are.
For sure.
They are. But I have very specific usage.
Yeah.
That you know, I don't want to put a camera in a big housing and do, you know, this or that. That sort of takes away from the intimacy of what I'm trying to do with a hot spring series. So they're tools, you know, and you can love your tools, or just appreciate the tools, but they're still tools to me. And so I have a fondness for them to a degree, but I focus more on, you know, the appropriate tool, just like, and this is an old thing that people say, but, you know, they're like brushes. You know, you use the appropriate brush for what you're trying to do.
Definitely.
You know, if you're a painter.
Definitely. So I am curious about how close you actually were from the athletes at the Olympics.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of telephoto lenses were you using?
Well, you know,
was it a 200 or like a 600? Like, how far or how close?
It completely depends on the sport.
Right.
And so, you know, if we're shooting what we call soccer, you know, what the rest of the world calls football. You know, that's my 400 2.8, which I probably would be better off with a zoom, and a super telephoto zoom might be better. But I just love the Nikkor Z 400 2.8. And then it has, I can go to 560 or 540. It's a 1.4 teleextender built in.
Wow.
Which is amazing. And so that was my go-to for anything in a distance. But for gymnastics, we're much closer.
Right.
And so the 70 to 200
was enough.
But all my lenses are non-variable f-stops. Very important for me. I want fast.
Definitely.
I don't want to give up any f-stops. And so now I'm loving the Nikon Z 85 1.2, I think it is. Not that I'm necessarily going to shoot a 1.2, but I want to be able to shoot pretty wide open and get the beautiful bokeh.
Yeah.
Since we got to say bokeh, right?
Bokeh.
Bokeh.
Not bokeh.
Not bokeh. It's 100% not bokeh. And because I can speak Japanese fairly well, I guarantee you it's not bokeh.
Right.
But at least,
for all of you guys watching out there, it's bokeh.
Bokeh. Yeah.
Bokeh.
Yeah, exactly. The H was added from my research, or it was really Mike Johnson, who was an editor at the time at Photo Techniques, and he added the H so people just wouldn't call it bokeh.
Right. For the non-Japanese speakers, right? Because in Japanese we know it's like bokeh.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Yeah, it has to be, right? Because it's
there's no silent sounds in Japanese.
Well, no, the key thing is there's only N. The sound N is the only consonant. Right. That you can have at the end of a word, like ramen. Right. Something like that, but there's no H at the end. Right. And so, but that was added so people would call it bokeh. It was bokeh. Yeah. It's the closest to it. Yeah. But that's such an important aspect of an image for me. It's not, in fact, Dan Winters, I spoke with the other day, is a great portraitist. And he said he really thinks of a photograph as two photographs, the subject and everything else, or specifically the background. And you have to think about both. Yeah. And I think amateur photographers, when I'm teaching workshops, they're thinking so much about the subject they're forgetting about everything else. Right. And so my typical thing is like, well, how would you paint the photo? Yeah. I mean, how would you paint this image, rather? You know, would you have a ton of dead space up here? Right. No, I would do maybe this or whatever. Right. And then you start thinking about that. And really the art and what professional photographers do is they really know how to use their f-stop. Yeah. The magic comes with the f-stop. For sure. And you see that in cinematography. I mean, you see with like one of my favorite filmmakers, you know, Stanley Kubrick. You see how well he used it. He had a special lens made. I'm sorry, he used a NASA lens. It was like a 0.
The .70 or something.
Or something like that, right? Unbelievable. Yeah. You know, and so I'm not that brave. I can't shoot with anything under, you know, I'm not.
It's honestly really hard to focus at that point.
I would think so. But you do have a focus puller with you. Right, you know, if you're using a lens like that, I guess. And I don't have any focus pullers with me, so. Right. Yeah. But the magic so I would encourage everybody to really think about, okay, we all know that you need a certain shutter speed if you don't want movement or whatever. But after that, the art is in the aperture. And that doesn't mean always going wide. Yeah. You might want, you know, a ton of depth of field for whatever reason, more than the eye has. Right. Right? Right. or you might want to go super shallow, and to bring you to the viewer.
Right.
I don't need to see way behind you. I want that just to go off into the soft, whatever.
Yeah.
And so I think, and that's why photographers have a huge luxury over cinematographers, because we can go to as fast a shutter speed as we want. Where with video cameras, and especially in the old days, it was typically used to be just double your frame rate.
Yeah.
And that was it. And so that's why neutral density filters were such a big part in the movie world.
Right.
But still, photographers, okay, we use it because we want to go super slow for a special thing like waterfalls or something.
Right.
But so so that's, once again, that's where the technical aspect comes in that I think about. But once again, it's more on the need to know basis. Yeah.
Okay. Understood. Okay. Now I am going to segue us into a very interesting topic that I know a lot of the viewers are interested in. So let's talk about gear.
Okay.
What's your current setup for traveling?
That's a great question. Actually, for Professional Photographer magazine, I just wrote something about that. There's a number of levels to that, because I'm pretty much a one-man band.
Okay.
And so, I use all think tank bags.
Okay.
And now they have great bags that you use for, your personal items, clothes and everything else. That's a fairly new thing, and that's a roller. When I did the Olympics in Paris, it's very interesting how you have to pack for that. Almost all the photographers had the same thing, which was basically a rolling bag.
Okay.
So a think tank roller, airport security, or some other roller bags most people had, because you can't then take those bags out into the arena, and so you would basically have to carry them.
They have to be on your body?
No, there's lockers at the arenas.
Gotcha.
And you leave them, and so almost everybody has roller bags, including me.
Yeah.
And you put the stuff in the locker, and then you carry your, one body with in my case, a monopod, it's holding a 400 2.8 and a Z9, and then typically my Z8.
Yeah.
I've got a 7200, and then in my pockets, because we're given vests at the Olympics, and I have 24 to 70 in there, something like that, and or if it's a special occasion, like when I shoot the Dodgers or something, I might even want a 14 to 24 to get the players running out of the dugout.
Yeah.
And that's such an amazing thing. I wanted to be a baseball player, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so to actually be in the dugout with them, I mean, we're separated by a little, I don't know what you call it, little fence kind of thing, but just a little thing. But to have our the photographers' little
area,
dugout.
right,
Exactly,
okay.
a photographer's pit. But I mean, I'm right with them. I hear them talking and everything, and so it's an incredible experience. And so I have typically for that, I'll have that same setup. Let's say for the Dodgers, and I'll have a sling. Think Tank makes a great sling bag.
Okay.
Because that I can carry out with me.
Right.
And so same thing with the Olympics. Sometimes if I needed really extra equipment, I would have it there. And of course, extra batteries for sure, very important. Extra cards. I use Delkin cards. Have to be reliable cards, for sure.
Definitely.
Delkin's great. Lighting, when of course you can't light at the Olympics. No artificial lighting. Only videographers, when they're doing their setups, can do that.
Right.
But I have Pro Photos and Stella lights. If I'm doing constant lights, it's Stella. If it's strobes, it's Pro Photo. Or I might just have the Nikon, 5000. And then sometimes when I'm just walking around, I do love that Leica monochrome.
Oh yeah.
And I still love black and white. I was mostly a black and white shooter up until about 2004, 2005, when I first, went to North Korea. I decided I should just show color, also digital. I didn't want to carry in a big bags of film. That was going to just telegraph that I was a photographer, and I didn't want to do.
Right.
So I have different bags. I have just some camera backpacks, because of course you can't roll everything everywhere. And a
Right.
lot of stuff I do is, I did the Everest.
Right, when you're hiking
Yeah,
somewhere
when I did
then-
the Everest, trek, of course, it's very hard to roll a bag,
For sure.
yeah, and so I have, the backpacks, think tank backpacks that are just fantastic. So there's and then there's an urban bag that I use if I did a whole thing during COVID
Okay.
on called Naked Hollywood, which is
Okay.
about Hollywood stripped of tourists.
Right.
And so there's a little nod to Ouija with that title. But that was the urban bag doesn't particularly look like it's a photo bag, because you got to go fairly low key in those situations.
Okay.
So I and then I have a logistics manager for rolling my
Your lights.
my pro photos or my Stellas.
That's like the bigger
Yeah,
roller
very,
bags.
very, and they're so sturdy. I mean, that's just vital.
That's
You
great.
don't need something to break down when you're somewhere.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
So it sounds like you have a lot of bags. Do you know
I have
around
a good
how
amount
many?
of bags. Well, I get rid of bags. I donate them. I probably have 5 bags.
Okay.
But if I move to a newer bag, I get rid of stuff.
Right. Gotcha.
Yeah.
You don't like hoard them.
No.
Like,
no,
oh, I
no,
could
no,
use
no,
this
no.
for
Books I
whatever
hoard.
future. Right.
Yeah, books I hoard. But also, a tripod. There's Really Right Stuff. There's Benro. Great backpacks.
Yeah.
Go along with great tripods.
Oh, I
and
didn't
great
know they made
cameras.
backpacks too. I
Oh,
only know
no! I
them
meant
as-
think tank. I meant think tank.
Okay,
In
gotcha,
other words,
gotcha.
because I sort of put them in one, because I want a tripod that I could easily put on the side of my backpack.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
Because I really, I do think I've got, 2 hands and a back.
Right.
And so that's it. I don't ever want to carry more than that. Or, if we're doing a bigger job, of course, then, of course, that's when you have assistants, and that's a different ball game. But if it's just me, at most, I want to have, a roller bag or 2 roller bags and a backpack.
Right.
That's it.
Right. Okay. So if you could keep only one camera and lens setup,
Yeah.
what would that be?
The 24 to 70 for sure.
Okay.
24 to 70 covers most of what you need.
Yeah.
I mean, I wish there was a super fast 24 to 85 that was a 2.8. Now, somebody might make one out there. But that, I would like that extra little distance, because 85, the compression of an 85, you can do, head and shoulder shots.
Right.
And you could do 3/4 shots.
Yeah.
But that 24 to 85 range is so perfect. But I would want a 2.8. I don't want a Ford slides to 5.6, because I think there's a 24 to 105. Right. If they had to make a 24 to 105 2.8, it would be bigger.
Yeah,
Now there might
right.
be one out there. Somebody in the audience probably
Yeah.
knows that.
I'm not sure about that.
But a 24 to 85 2.8 would really be ideal. So, and I actually did mention that to Nikon before, because they brought me in the back, not to rough me over or anything, work me over, but to ask me when I was at the Olympics. They had their people in from Japan, and they said, "What would be your dream lens?"
Right.
And so, because they take it very seriously, they're
Yeah.
looking and they want to know, and so I said a 24 to 85 2.8. That would be, I think, the ideal. So if I could only have one, that would be it for sure.
Gotcha. So before Leica, I used to shoot Canon because
Yeah.
I did a lot of weddings and events.
Oh, yeah.
And the 24 to 70 was definitely my favorite
Go
as
to
well.
almost everybody's.
I
would
travel
think.
with that lens because
Yeah.
it's so versatile. Like
is.
it's just that one lens.
No, you really can. In the old days, when I was shooting a Nikon FM2, whatever, I would have a 28, a 50, and an 85, and that was pretty much it.
Okay.
That was it. And then eventually, I think I got a 20 millimeter. And I don't think my style or the photos
Wow.
have changed that much in all these years. And I still love, fixed fast lenses.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That hasn't changed at all. And they're all
Interesting.
great. Canon's great, Nikon,
Right.
Fuji, Sony, Leica. They're all great. So it's
Yeah.
just what you feel like,
Definitely.
using. And some, manufacturers make things that, and also, you know, the other lenses now, Sigma has, you know, Tokina, they're making great lenses too.
Yeah.
It's really more how you use them. That's the key.
Definitely, definitely.
Yeah, it's really more how you use them.
Yep. Wow. Well, we've covered so much today. I really appreciate your time. Before we go, one last question for you. What advice do you have for aspiring photographers?
Boy, it's such a simple question, but such a complex one. What do I have? Well, come up with your own stories is the key.
Okay.
Never. I mean, Eve Arnold told me that years ago, and it's so true, and even more true. You've got to come up with your own stories if you're going to do the sort of genres that I'm working in. Mm-hmm. Never wait around for the phone to ring, and keep business hours. Mm-hmm. I learned that early on because when I was starting, I was very frustrated and sort of anxious. It's like, oh, I'm going to work, this or that. And so I'd go play golf. Well, that didn't relax me. You know,
right.
On a weekday, in other words. I love golf. You know, if I'm going to play, you know, I'll do 9 holes, you know, and I'm home by 9 to work. Mm. Now, the only time I sort of take off on a weekday is if I've worked the weekend on a big job.
Yeah.
And if I need a little time off to decompress or whatever. But basically, keep business hours and come up with your own story ideas.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you so much
My
again
pleasure.
for your time today. It's been truly fascinating learning about your experiences, your travels, and the gears that you use.
I appreciate that. Thanks for having me.
Thank you again.
Good.